What if the person you trusted most, loved most, wasn't just broken, but willingly chose darkness over healing, control over connection, and cruelty over truth, and smiled while doing it? You know, there's a moment, sometimes it's small, almost imperceptible, when you realize that the person you're dealing with no longer sees you. Not really, not as a human being, not as someone with feelings, needs, or a beating heart. You could be sobbing in front of them or finally opening up about the very thing that broke you, and they'll look at you with that blank, bored stare. That's not just a sign of disconnection. That's the death of empathy. When we talk about narcissism, we often think of arrogance, vanity, control, but the core of it, what really defines that final unraveling, is when they lose the capacity or maybe the willingness to feel with you. Empathy isn't just about understanding someone intellectually. It's about feeling with them, being moved. And when a narcissist has finally sold their soul, to use that metaphor, empathy isn't just diminished, it's gone. Replaced, traded in like some inconvenient burden for the cold, efficient machinery of domination. You start noticing it and how they respond when you're vulnerable. At first, maybe they feign interest, they nod, give you just enough to think they're still human. But after a while, it becomes clear. There's no comfort in their touch, no warmth in their words. If you cry, you're annoying. If you succeed, you're a threat. If you're in pain, it's your own fault. And secretly, they might even enjoy it, because at that point, you're not a person anymore. You're a function, a mirror, an obstacle, a tool, nothing more. And here's the kicker. It's not always loud. It's not always abusive in the way we expect abuse to look sometimes. It's quiet. It's the silence when you most need reassurance, the shrug when you beg for understanding, the casual dismissal of your boundaries, your fears, your trauma. They don't slam the door. They just stop opening it. You can beg, you can scream, you can contort yourself into someone more pleasing, more palatable. But when empathy has died in them, none of it will matter, because they've reached the point where connection isn't just unimportant, it's inconvenient. Empathy slows them down. It creates accountability. It tugs on their conscience. And by now, they've made it very clear they don't want a conscience, they want control. And let's not romanticize this. This isn't the tortured soul trying their best. This isn't someone who's just been hurt too many times. That's a different story. What I'm talking about is the point of no return, when they've buried their ability to care so deep, they've convinced themselves it never existed, when the only emotions they recognize are their own, and even those are usually twisted by entitlement or rage. There's a cruelty in that kind of emptiness, and it is a kind of emptiness, because what's left when empathy is gone? What's left when you no longer recognize the humanity in another person? You get this hollow shell that mimics connection just well enough to manipulate you, but never deeply enough to touch you. And you'll feel it. You'll feel like you're standing in a room with someone whose soul has been boarded up, whose eyes see through you like you're air, whose love, if you can even call it that, is conditional, transactional, temporary. And now here's something else that's hard to admit. We often stay too long, thinking we can bring them back, thinking maybe if we're softer, maybe if we're more patient, more loving, they'll snap out of it. But when someone has abandoned empathy entirely, it's not about you not being enough. It's about them not being capable. They chose the mask. They chose the power. They chose to shut the door on the very thing that makes us human, our capacity to feel for each other. So if you've ever looked into the eyes of someone you once loved and realized they were no longer reachable, that they weren't hearing you, weren't seeing you, weren't feeling you, it's not your fault. That ache you felt, that was your soul still alive, still fighting. And the chill you felt from them, that was theirs, already gone. And when that happens, the rest will follow. It starts subtly, like a shift in the wind you can't quite name. You notice that stories don't line up. Conversations get rewritten. Events you lived through together get retold with strange little edits. At first, you think maybe it's forgetfulness, maybe stress, but deep down, something doesn't feel right. You're being asked over and over to doubt what you saw, what you heard, what you know. And slowly, painfully, you realize the truth doesn't live here anymore. When a narcissist reaches that breaking point, the moment they've completely given themselves over to their false self, lying doesn't just become common. It becomes foundational. It's not about little white lies to smooth over social discomfort. No, this is something different, something darker. This is about constructing entire realities that serve them, even if those realities require tearing you apart in the process. And they do it with such calm conviction. It's not the sweaty, nervous kind of lying that comes from fear of being caught. It's smooth, confident, like the truth is clay in their hands and they're sculpting it to whatever shape suits the moment. They lie about what they said. They lie about what you said. They lie about what they did 5 minutes ago. And the worst part, they lie to themselves so deeply, so thoroughly that they believe the stories they're telling, even while they're burning the world down around them. Truth becomes dangerous to them because truth carries consequences. Truth means they might have to look at themselves, really look. And that's not something they're willing to do. So instead they bury it. They smother it with charm, with deflection, with rage, with just enough half-truth to make you question your own memory. Gaslighting isn't just a tactic. It becomes the very language they speak. A whole vocabulary of denial, projection, and revisionism, and the effect it has on you. It's disorienting. You start second guessing yourself. You start explaining things that should never need explaining. You walk away from conversations feeling guilty, confused, or even apologetic when all you did was ask for honesty. You feel like you're drowning, but they're on the shore telling you the water isn't real. And after a while, that starts to work. You begin to believe maybe it is you. Maybe you're too sensitive, too dramatic. Maybe you're the one who's off balanced. But here's the thing, you're not. That feeling in your gut, that's your truth trying to survive. That's your soul fighting to stay intact while someone else tries to overwrite it. Because when someone has fully committed to living in lies, anyone who lives in truth becomes a threat. They don't want to coexist with your clarity. They want to erase it. Silence it, replace it with their version, their narrative, their script. You'll hear them say things like, I never said that, even though you remember the words clearly. Or you're just imagining things when you point out patterns. They'll call you crazy, dramatic, paranoid, when all you're doing is trying to hold on to what's real. Because to them, the truth doesn't hold value unless it makes them look good or puts them in control. And if it doesn't, it has to go. They can't build intimacy because intimacy requires vulnerability and vulnerability requires truth. And they've traded all of that for performance, for image, for power. And when someone has done that, when their relationship with truth is so broken that lying feels more natural than honesty, you're not in a relationship anymore. You're in a hall of mirrors. And every time you try to touch something real, your hand just hits glass. The longer you stay, the more your sense of reality erodes. You stop trusting your own instincts. You hesitate before speaking. You rehearse conversations in your head, trying to guess which version of the truth will keep the peace. And little by little, their lie becomes your silence. But here's what I need you to hear. Your truth still matters. Even if no one else validates it, even if they rewrite it 100 times, the moment you start speaking it again out loud, clearly, without apology, that's the moment the spell starts to break. Because truth is resilient like that. It doesn't vanish. And when you return to it, you start returning to yourself. And when a narcissist has fully embraced the lie, when their entire world is built on fiction and illusion, your honesty becomes your greatest act of defiance. There comes a moment, somewhat often when you least expect it, where you see it, a flicker, a smile that's just a little too satisfied when you're hurting, a spark in their eyes when you're breaking. And it stops you cold because something in your body recognizes the truth before your mind can fully process it. They're not just indifferent to your pain. They're enjoying it. It's one thing to deal with someone who lacks empathy, someone who lies and manipulates. That alone is exhausting. But this is something different. When a narcissist has fallen all the way into the depths, when they've given themselves over entirely to the need for power, control, and ego above all else, what you start to see is cruelty, not reactive cruelty, not lashing out in anger cruelty. No, what you see is intentional, chosen. Enjoy it. And the way it plays out, it's often subtle at first. They know just where to poke, just how to twist the knife. They'll ask you about your deepest wounds with a curious, gentle tone, only to use those same wounds against you later, not in a moment of heated argument. No, they wait. They wait until your guard is down, until you're vulnerable, until you're hopeful again. Then they strike. And it's not an accident. It's not a mistake. It's calculated. Because at that point, your pain serves a purpose. It confirms their power. It proves they still control the emotional temperature of the room. It gives them a sense of superiority to know that they can cause pain and walk away untouched. And when they've truly crossed that line, when they've stopped pretending they want connection, they begin to feed off it, not always with visible glee, but in the satisfaction of watching you unravel while they remain composed, smug, untouched. They'll provoke you with a cutting remark, then act offended when you react. They'll invalidate your feelings and then accuse you of being emotionally unstable. And when you finally break, when you cry, plead, or fall silent, they'll say, see, this is exactly what I mean. You're too sensitive. It's a trap, and it's one they've set with care. Because in their world, your suffering equals their stability. Your chaos equals their control. It sounds twisted because it is twisted. And it's hard to accept that someone you once trusted, maybe even loved, could derive satisfaction from seeing you struggle. But that's what happens when a narcissist has fully sold out their humanity for dominance. They don't just need you to lose, they need to win at your expense. And the currency they trade in isn't just attention anymore. It's control, submission, silence. This isn't the pain of someone who lashes out and regrets it. This isn't someone who's defensive or immature. This is someone who hurts you and watches, who studies the effect, who refines the strategy. And when you start to see the pattern that every time you find joy, peace, or success, they show up with a storm, you realize they're not just passively hurting you. They're choosing to, and here's the most heartbreaking part, the better you are, the more light you bring, the more they want to dim it. They're threatened by your healing, by your growth, by your voice. So they create drama where there was none. They stir up insecurity. They find the tender places and press. Because as long as you're hurting, you're not rising. And if you're not rising, they don't have to face what they've become. But you don't have to keep performing in their game. You don't have to keep offering explanations to someone who only listens to find ammunition. You don't have to prove your pain to someone who finds pleasure in it. Because that moment you saw the glimmer of satisfaction in their eyes, that wasn't your imagination, that was your truth saying, look closely, this isn't love, this is cruelty in disguise. When someone smiles at your suffering, it's not about you, it's about how far they've fallen, how much they've abandoned their own soul. And the most courageous thing you can do is walk away before you start losing pieces of your own. There's something uniquely painful about realizing the person you've been trying so hard to understand isn't really there, or rather the version you thought you knew never actually existed. It's a mask, a performance, a carefully curated image crafted to meet a need, get a reaction, secure control. And after enough time, after enough lies and manipulation and disconnection, the mask doesn't just stay on, it becomes the only face they know. So what makes narcissism so disorienting isn't just the manipulation, it's the performance. In the beginning, they're charming, magnetic, often intensely attentive. They mirror your values, your dreams, your wounds. You think you've finally found someone who gets you, but what you've really found is a chameleon, someone whose sense of self is built not from within, but from what they think you want to see. And once they figure that out, they wear it like a costume. But here's what's terrifying. They're not pretending in the way most of us do from time to time to keep the peace or play a role. No. They're pretending because the real self, the authentic, vulnerable, flawed, honest self was discarded a long time ago, got buried under shame, fear, ego, and this desperate, relentless need to never feel small again. So instead of doing the hard work of healing, they build the false self. Persona made entirely of projections and illusions, reinforced by control and attention. And over time, they forget the difference. The mask becomes more real to them than who they actually are. They believe their own story. They repeat their own lies enough times that they don't hear them as lies anymore. They're not just fooling you, they're fooling themselves. And in that place, there is no room for growth, no room for connection, because every interaction is filtered through that character they've built, the successful one, the victim, the misunderstood genius, the seductive partner, the morally superior martyr. Whatever role secures the most power in the moment. You try to reach them, but it's like trying to talk through glass. You speak your truth, but it doesn't register. They can't take it in because to do so would threaten the entire identity they've constructed. Accountability feels like attack. Vulnerability looks like weakness. And authenticity, it's dangerous because it's too real, too raw, too honest. And honesty has no place in a world built entirely on illusion. So what do they do instead? They double down. They protect the mask at all costs. They twist the narrative to suit them. If you catch them in a lie, it's your fault for misinterpreting. If you express hurt, it's your fault for being too emotional. If you ask for change, it's your fault for being impossible to please. Every truth you bring forward becomes a threat. Every feeling becomes a weapon. They turn back on you. And all the while, they keep the performance going, hoping the applause drowns out the truth. The tragedy here isn't just that they've fooled others, it's that they've lost themselves. You can't live behind a mask forever and not forget who you were underneath it. That false identity becomes so reinforced, so dependent on control, image, and approval that to take it off would feel like death, not ego death, not spiritual growth, literal collapse. And so they protect it with everything they've got, even if it means destroying relationships, betraying trust, and pushing away the people who love them most. And if you've ever loved someone like this, you know how exhausting it is because you're not just loving a person, you're trying to love through a mask. You're trying to connect with someone who's more committed to maintaining their image than being real with you. And it wears you down. It makes you start to question your own reality. You begin to wonder if you're the one who's off, but you're not. You're just trying to have an honest relationship with someone who's allergic to honesty. Eventually, you have to stop, not because you didn't care enough, not because you didn't try, but because there's no partnership with the persona. There's no intimacy with the performance. You can't build a future with someone who's abandoned their present to protect a lie. And when the mask becomes the only thing they have left to offer, you have to decide if you're willing to keep dancing with a ghost. Because no matter how convincing the performance, it's still not real. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from abandonment, from watching someone you once trusted slowly pull away, not in an honest way, not in a way that offers closure or clarity, but in a way that leaves ashes where there used to be connection. And the worst part is they walk away like they've done nothing wrong, sometimes even with a smile. That's what happens when a narcissist finally reaches a point where they've burned every bridge and feel nothing but pride about it. This isn't your average fallout. This isn't two people growing apart or having a disagreement. This is intentional, cold, methodical. One by one, they sever ties, not because it's painful, but because it's powerful. Because for them, relationships aren't sacred, they're strategic. And when a narcissist decides you're no longer useful, no longer feeding the story they need to tell about themselves, they discard you emotionally, physically, spiritually, without flinching. And if you try to stop it, if you beg for understanding, if you ask them to stay, if you remind them of all the memories, the love, the shared history, they look at you like you're weak, like you've somehow embarrassed yourself by caring too much. Because in their world, detachment isn't loss, it's leverage. It proves they're untouchable, that no one can hold them accountable, that even love is something that can drop when it no longer benefits them. But what's even more painful is that it often comes after you've already given so much, after you've excused the lies, after you've tolerated the manipulation, after you've worked overtime trying to save the relationship, convince them to go to therapy, explain one more time how deeply they're hurting you. You show up again and again, hoping this time something will click. But instead of gratitude or growth, you're met with indifference or worse, contempt. And when they finally leave, they don't grieve, they gloat. It's not just partners either, it's friends, it's siblings, parents, even children. Anyone who challenges their narrative, threatens their illusion of control, or demands vulnerability becomes disposable. And they don't just walk away, they rewrite the story on their way out. They'll tell others you were unstable, difficult, impossible to love. They turn people against you, not because you deserve it, but because it keeps them in the role of victim or hero, whichever one earns them more sympathy. And if you call it out, if you dare to shine a light on the destruction they've left behind, you become the enemy, not because you're wrong, but because you saw too much. You got too close to the truth. and now you're dangerous. So they erase you, they ghost you, they pretend you never mattered, or worse, that you were always the problem. It's a form of psychological violence, and it can leave you questioning your worth, your reality, your ability to trust. But the real truth is this: their ability to walk away without remorse isn't a sign of strength, it's a sign of emptiness, of spiritual isolation. Because when someone has truly sold out their humanity for control, they don't form real bonds. They form attachments based on what you can give them: attention, praise, obedience. And when those things run out, so do they. And yet, the people they leave behind, they're often the ones carrying the grief, holding all the shattered pieces, wondering what they did wrong. The pain of being discarded like that isn't just about the loss. It's about the invisibility. It's the realization that your love, your loyalty, your effort, all of it was never really seen, never really valued, because the narcissist doesn't view love as a mutual exchange. They view it as a resource to be extracted, and when the well runs dry, they move on, not because they're heartbroken, but because they've already decided you were replaceable. It's a brutal thing to accept, but it's also clarifying, because once you see it for what it is, you stop waiting for closure that's never coming. You stop blaming yourself. You stop hoping they'll wake up one day and realize what they lost, because the truth is they never fully had you, not in the way you deserve to be held, seen, or honored. There's no healing in chasing someone who never cared enough to stay. There's a point where it stops being about dysfunction and starts being about destruction. When a narcissist has fully crossed over, when they've sold out their soul for power, image, and control, they don't just hurt people in their orbit, they begin to infect them. They leave a trail behind them, a pattern, a path of devastation that starts to look eerily similar from person to person, relationship to relationship, and place to place. And the most chilling part is they're not interested in changing it. In fact, they're proud of it. You begin to see it when you look back and realize everyone who gets close to them ends up worse off. Not just confused or heartbroken, but deeply altered, smaller, more afraid, less trusting. Their relationships don't evolve, they erode. And it's not random, it's orchestrated. Because at some point, control stops being a means to an end and starts being the point. Wielding pain becomes a source of energy for them. And the more they get away with it, the more emboldened they become. It's like they start feeding off destruction, not in a Hollywood villain way, but in a slow, insidious, calculated one. They pit people against each other. They sabotage careers, isolate friends, unravel communities. And they do it all while keeping their own hands clean. They know how to whisper just the right thing to the right person to make doubt spread like wildfire. They use charm as a weapon and charisma as camouflage. And while you're trying to make sense of what's happening, they're already 5 moves ahead, lining up the next conflict, the next manipulation, the next emotional takedown. But the most dangerous thing, they don't care about the cost. When someone has gone this deep into narcissism, they stop measuring outcomes by morality. They start measuring them by effectiveness. Did it work? Did I win? Did I come out looking like the victim or the hero? They aren't thinking about the damage they've done to someone's heart or the mental toll they've caused. They're thinking about how well they controlled the story. And when their inner emptiness grows, and it always does, they don't look inward. They reach outward for another source of power, another person to dominate, another truth to distort. You see them shift from person to person, leaving wreckage and confusion, but always keeping their own image intact, and the pattern becomes undeniable. There's no healing, no reflection, no reckoning, just movement. Just more chaos, more spinning plates, more smoke and mirrors. Because if they stop even for a moment, they'd have to face what's underneath. And that's the one thing they can't risk. What happens to the people around them, especially the ones who try to love them? They start to lose themselves. Their confidence disappears. Their joy fades. Their world gets smaller, dimmer, more distorted. It's not just abuse. It's corrosion. Over time, it becomes spiritual damage, not because the person being targeted is weak, but because constant gaslighting, manipulation, and emotional violence breaks something inside. It forces people to survive in a reality that keeps shifting, and survival in that space costs something. And still, the narcissist walks away feeling justified, They'll tell the next person how hard it was, how misunderstood they've been, how ungrateful everyone else is. They leave out the details that matter, the cruelty, the sabotage, the psychological warfare. They rewrite history as they go. And if anyone dares to tell the truth, that person becomes the next target, because the more powerful their illusion becomes, the more dangerous truth becomes to them. This is what it looks like when someone is fully sold out. It's not just about ego anymore. It's about choosing destruction over honesty, manipulation over intimacy, and domination over connection, over and over again. Not because they don't know better, but because knowing better doesn't serve their goal. The trail of damage isn't collateral. It's evidence of the system working exactly as they've designed it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You realize it was never about whether you were lovable, smart, enough, or worthy. It was about how close you were to the blast zone, because that's what they do. They get close, they extract, they destroy, and they move on. And the hardest truth of all, they know it. They've made peace with it. And they'd rather live as the architect of someone else's downfall than ever face the pain of their own. Sometimes the only way to survive is to stop hoping they'll change and start seeing them clearly.